News of the Times. The Ivy Inn murder. A single wound and a vanishing killer. 1891. Linthwaite, Huddersfield in 1891. 16-year-old Catherine Dennis had been trusted to run the Ivy Inn alone many times before. But on a quiet afternoon in 1891, delivery workers arrived to find the pub strangely empty, with no sign of Catherine. Neighbours searched the building and made a horrifying discovery. On the upper landing lay Catherine's body, still warm, surrounded by a pool of blood. A small but deadly wound to the neck suggested a precise and deliberate attack. Rumours spread instantly. Had she fallen, been assaulted, or attacked by someone she knew? Panic swept through the village. 2 visiting strangers were arrested almost immediately, accused of murder before any evidence was gathered. But were they truly responsible, or had the real killer slipped back into the community unnoticed? As suspicions mounted, attention turned to a local man well known to the inn, a man who suddenly vanished, leaving behind his wife and a young daughter. What followed was a dramatic manhunt, a baffling forensic puzzle, and a chilling confession overheard in a prison ward. This episode explores the haunting mystery of the Ivy Inn murder, the discovery of Catherine Dennis on the landing, the tiny wound that severed the jugular, the wrongful arrest of 2 innocent strangers, and the sudden disappearance of a familiar neighbour, the manhunt that followed, and the unsettling confession that finally cracked the case. Join us as we uncover the truth behind one of Huddersfield's most disturbing Victorian tragedies, a case of fear, misjudgment, and a killer hiding in plain sight. And in today's further particulars case, if you think one fugitive was enough for the Victorian papers that week, think again. On the very same day, reporters cheerfully informed the public of a second murderer on the run, except this one wasn't hiding on the moors, but on a ship, and for reasons known only to himself, he was completely naked. Having snapped his restraints with a fishhook and vanished into the cargo like a disgruntled ferret, he survived for over a month by raiding the stores and evading the crew. Eventually, hunger forced negotiations, and he surrendered, still unclothed, thoroughly emaciated, and no doubt rethinking several of his life choices. Victorian journalism never lacked variety. So, with all that ahead of us, the quiet pub, the sudden panic, the vanishing neighbour, and a naked fugitive bubbling about on the high seas, settle in. Make yourself comfortable, pour a cup of tea, and let the lamps glow softly. Together, we'll step back into England in 1891, where ordinary days could turn extraordinary in an instant, and where every village, every ship, and every shadow held a story waiting to be told. Linthwaite in 1891. Picture the Colne Valley in the winter of 1891, a long, steep-sided Yorkshire valley where rows of stone cottages cling to the hillside like steps cut into the earth. The mills along the river thrum steadily beneath a low sky, their tall chimneys breathing thin trails of smoke that drift across the cold air. Narrow lanes wind between the houses, their cobbles damp with mist, and the scent of coal fires carries from door to door. Linthwaite is a village where everyone knows everyone else's business. A close-knit community of mill workers, carters, and small tradespeople bound together by routine and proximity. Children run errands between the cottages, neighbours stop to talk at their gates, and the local inn is a familiar landmark, its doors opening to travellers, deliverymen and villagers alike. Inside the Ivy Inn, the world feels smaller still. Flagged floors, low ceilings, the warmth of a coal grate, and the everyday rhythm of comings and goings. It is the sort of place where nothing remarkable is expected to happen, a place of ordinary work, ordinary gossip, and the safety of routine. And yet, on this quiet December afternoon, beneath the grey light of a Yorkshire winter, something extraordinary and deeply unsettling was about to unfold. Girls in service in 1891. In the late 19th century, it was entirely ordinary for girls to be sent into service in their early teens. Many began work at 12 or 13, often far from home, taking on long hours and heavy duties in exchange for board, a modest wage, and the hopes of stability. Young women in service were expected to be capable, self-reliant, and uncomplaining. And though it seems extraordinary today, leaving a 14 or 15-year-old girl to run a village inn alone, even with men drifting in for their midday pint, was not regarded as dangerous or unusual. It was simply how the world functioned. Catherine Dennis. Into this world stepped Catherine Dennis, a Welsh girl who began working at the Ivy Inn at the age of 14, some 72 miles from home. Catherine quickly earned a reputation as a reliable and cheerful young woman. She sang as she worked, light, easy tunes that floated through the rooms as she swept, scrubbed, or washed glasses. The regulars knew her as a steady and good-natured girl who kept her head down and her duties in order. She had no known suitors, no hint of flirtation with the men who passed through the door. Catherine was, in every sense, simply a hard-working teenager trying to build a future. And it was this ordinary family routine, a girl trusted to run the inn, neighbours within earshot, nothing amiss expected, in which the events of December 1891 took their tragic and unthinkable turn. From the Huddersfield Chronicle, the 22nd of August 1891, horrible tragedy at Linthwaite. A young woman brutally murdered. Supposed important clues. A murder of horrible brutality was committed on the outskirts of the borough of Huddersfield yesterday evening. The scene of the tragedy in this instance is no obscure district impenetrable to good government and incapable of being effectively ruled by the police, but an open and busy thoroughfare in Linthwaite. The time is not the dead of night, but broad daylight, and the exact site is not an obscure court or alley, but the public house known as the Ivy. In spite of these circumstances, however, a murder, and that accompanied with accessory brutality, was committed upon a young girl left alone in charge of the house, without anyone having been yet found who can provide more than circumstantial evidence as to its commission. As far as they have been ascertained up to late hour last night, the following appears to be a narrative of the facts. Mrs. Margaret Brooke, who has been the tenant of the Ivy in Linthwaite for nearly 2 decades, has been managing her house with the assistance of one girl, Catherine Dennis, aged 15, a native of Flint in Flintshire. In Mrs. Brooke's absence, this girl had been in charge of the house. Yesterday, Mrs. Brooke left her home and came to Huddersfield, leaving the girl alone. At the house, John William Iredale was refreshing himself at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the girl being hale and well then. Two men whose names at that time were not known but were known at the house were seen to come in, and Iredale left them alone with the girl while he proceeded about his business in the ordinary way. Then comes a blank. The next ascertained fact is that at 4 o'clock approximately a lad named Beavers called at the house for the purpose of delivering some meat. It appeared deserted to him, and he went outside again and made inquiries amongst the neighbours. A Mrs. Sarah Ann Bailey, who lives in the vicinity, came to his aid and stated that she knew there ought to be someone there. Together they retraced their steps to the house, and the woman, on finding no one as the lad had done before her, proceeded to make a search about the premises. On going upstairs, an appalling sight met her eyes. Stretched on the floor, on her back, with a pool of blood around her neck, lay the poor girl with a minute gash in her throat. After a cursory examination, the woman hastened outside again and raised the neighbourhood. The news spread like wildfire. The residents and passers-by quickly thronged the premises. The police were summoned, a doctor was fetched, and, owing to the position of the wound and of the blood that had flowed from it, and the appearance of the body of the unfortunate girl, it was clear that the notion of suicide must be cast aside, and that of murder, possibly accompanied by foul dishonour, must be substituted for it. While the villagers were raising the alarm, another thread of the story was already unfolding. John William Iredale, the last person known to have seen Catherine alive, had left the inn at around 3 o'clock, shortly after two visiting strangers arrived. When the word of the murder reached him, he immediately suspected the pair. He followed them along the road towards Slaithwaite, and, upon meeting Sergeant Ramsden and P.C. Downs, urgently reported his suspicions. On his information alone, the officers arrested the two men on suspicion of murder. The officers soon caught up with the two strangers, who were found quietly drinking in the Dartmouth Arms, one chatting with the landlord and the other reading in the tap room. Both men came willingly when told they were suspected of murder, protesting their innocence. By now the news had raced through the district. Crowds gathered at first Linthwaite and then again at Slaithwaite, and finally at Huddersfield station, eager to see the supposed killers. The two men were taken through the crush in handcuffs and placed in the cells, although, as events would later show, neither had any connection to the crime. The scene of the tragedy. During the evening, knots of villagers gathered around the road, discussing the details in hushed, urgent tones. The ivy itself was surrounded by onlookers, and from their expressions it was clear that, had the killer fallen into their hands, he would not have fared well. The ivy stood alone on the hillside at Smith Riding, a large detached building with no neighbours close enough to hear any cries for help. Inside, a short staircase led from the entrance hall to a narrow landing with bedrooms on either side and a larger band room used by local musicians. It was here, just a few steps above the bar, that Catherine Dennis was found lying in a pool of blood, her arms outstretched and her head turned towards the landlady's bedroom. The scene in the house was one to touch the heart of everyone who witnessed it. Poignant grief was depicted on the countenance of the landlady and the friends with her, some of whom had just completed the last sad offices of the dead. Indignation at the dreadful character of the crime was also apparent, and the women who laid out the body expressed most decidedly the opinion that the girl had been outraged and very badly treated too before the fatal blow was struck. The deceased was described as an inoffensive girl of a cheerful disposition who had no sweetheart and of whom no one appeared to have anything but good to say. The landlady's story. Mrs. Brooke, who was naturally more distressed than anybody else at the shocking occurrence that had taken place within the walls of her house, said her name was Margaret Brooke, and she had been a widow for nearly 9 years and would have lived at the Ivy Hotel for 20 years on the 2nd of March next. The deceased, whose name was Catherine Dennis, had been in her service for 11 months. She was 16 years of age last month and came from Flint in North Wales. Mrs. Brooke said she left the house at a few minutes to 2 to go to Huddersfield. The deceased had just served 2 stone cartmen with beer. Mrs. Brooke did not get home until between 5 and 10 minutes to 5 and was, as may be imagined, horrified at the news that was communicated to her. The deceased had said to Mrs. Brooke just before she left for Huddersfield, "Well, Mrs. Brooke, we have done cleaning the house's long chamber, but the windows want cleaning." Mrs. Brooke replied that the deceased had better leave them until the following day. From what transpired subsequently, it seemed that the deceased, anxious to get the work done, was cleaning upstairs and, according to one statement, was actually seen cleaning the windows at 4 o'clock. The deceased was a cheerful girl, Mrs. Brooke said, and was always singing over her work. Statements by neighbours. Shortly after Catherine should have opened the inn for afternoon trade, neighbours noticed something was amiss. A butcher's boy arrived with a delivery to find the door unattended. Mrs. Bailey and Mrs. Carter watched from across the road and saw him calling out and searching inside without reply. Others quickly joined the growing concern. Mrs. Brooke had gone to Huddersfield. The nearby cottage was locked, and a farmhand behind the inn reported seeing nothing unusual. Sensing trouble, a small group of villagers gathered and approached the Ivy together, determined to find out why Catherine Dennis had vanished from her duties. From the Huddersfield Chronicle, the 24th of August, 1891. The horrible tragedy at Linthwaite. A new development. Nothing that has occurred in Huddersfield in recent years has caused such intense excitement as has been evinced in the brutal murder of Catherine Dennis. The subject has been discussed on every hand, and the curiosity displayed by thousands of people and has led to scenes at the Ivy which can be but described as a little short of disgraceful. The road to and from the house on Saturday afternoon and Sunday was crowded with foot passengers and by vehicles of all descriptions, conveying the morbidly curious to the house. Here the doorway was literally besieged, and the people who were allowed to enter the houses in batches filed upstairs to view not only the scene of the outrage, but the body of the unfortunate victim. Subscriptions were also solicited to defray the expenses of interment. Altogether, the scene was one in which sympathy for the murdered girl seemed to be almost entirely forgotten, and whoever was responsible for this state of things was discreditable to all concerned. A discovery which seems to be regarded as important by the police, judging by their action they have taken, was made on Saturday morning. It is now stated that on Friday afternoon, before Mrs. Brooke left home, a man named James Stockwell, who lives at Delft Terrace, within 100 or 200 yards of the Ivy, came into the house, and she left him eating some pie which she had given him, using his pocket knife for the purpose. These were 2 cartmen in the house at the same time. Stockwell was seen to leave the house at about 4 o'clock, and, it is stated, turned up a lane leading on to the quarry and moorland in the neighbourhood. One singular circumstance about the affair is that Stockwell has not been home since the occurrence. His house has been watched day and night by a police constable, and a number of officers in plain clothes have been searching the surrounding neighbourhood to obtain some information as to his whereabouts. As to the men in custody, the almost universal opinion of the public seems to be, rightly or wrongly, that they are innocent, and the evidence given at the magisterial hearing this morning, as well as at the inquest, which is fixed to be held at 1:30 this afternoon at the Ivy Hotel, will be awaited with much interest. More evidence pointing to Stockwell. Further information soon strengthened the suspicions surrounding James Stockwell. Mr. John Walker of Smith Riding, who lived close to the Ivy, reported that he had visited the inn at around 2:30 on Friday. Catherine told him that Mrs. Brooke had gone to Huddersfield, and after a brief exchange about a gas bill, he left, noticing that Stockwell was sitting in the kitchen alone with the girl. When Mr. Walker returned at about 4 o'clock, he saw Stockwell leaving the inn. The man passed him near the cart shed, but did not look up, appearing, in Walker's words, a bit fresh. Walker did not know which direction Stockwell took, although he later heard the man had turned up View Tree Lane towards Crossland Hill rather than heading home. The sighting placed Stockwell alone in the house with Catherine shortly before her death, and then leaving the premises just as the tragedy must have occurred. With James Stockwell now the chief suspect, the police circulated a formal description to neighbouring stations. He was said to be about 32 years old, about 5'5", of rather stout build, with slight side whiskers and a moustache and a notably fresh complexion. When last seen, he'd been wearing striped fustian trousers, a brown cord waistcoat with jean sleeves, a black moleskin vest, a coarse hardened apron tied at the neck, and a low brown billycock hat and light shoes. Despite constant rumours over the weekend, each one swelling the crowds outside Huddersfield Borough Police Station, no fresh arrest had been made. The district waited, watching and wondering where Stockwell had gone. The vanishing of Stockwell. By the following morning, Stockwell had disappeared completely, despite constant patrolling, door-to-door inquiries, and a plain-clothes officers searching the surrounding hills and moorland. No trace of him was found. Rumours flew through Linthwaite, sightings, theories, and whispered speculation, each one sending the police chasing down yet another false lead. Public attention fixed itself entirely on the missing man. In every shop, mill, and tavern, people asked the same question: where is Stockwell? It seemed certain that if he showed his face anywhere in the district, the alarm would be raised instantly. Meanwhile, the first two arrested men were quietly released. Identification had collapsed, and all focus now rested on finding the man who had eaten pie in the Ivy just shortly before Catherine's death, and then slipped into the landscape without a word. Whilst police were anxiously scouring the county for the missing Stockwell, the inquiry into the death of young Catherine Dennis took place. From the Huddersfield Chronicle, the 25th of August, 1891, the coroner's inquiry. The inquiry into the circumstances attending the death of the unfortunate girl Catherine Dennis was opened in the band room at the Ivy Hotel on Monday afternoon. The deceased father said his daughter would have been 16 years old on the 26th of this month. The landlady, Mrs. Margaret Brooke, then gave her evidence, visibly distressed. Catherine had been in her service for 11 months and was, she said, the best girl that ever came into her house. Mrs. Brooke described leaving the inn at 10 minutes to 2, with Catherine standing in the doorway and watching her depart for Huddersfield. And when she left, only 3 others were inside. 2 carters in the taproom and James Stockwell, a local teamer, eating potato pie in the kitchen with his pocket knife. Mrs. Brooke explained that Stockwell had been in and out of the inn throughout the morning, asking repeatedly for food, tea, cake, bread, cheese, and helping himself to drip and salt. There was nothing in his manner to alarm her, although she noticed he had never before asked for so much to eat. Catherine, meanwhile, was cheerful and singing over her work before leaving. Mrs. Brooke told her she would be back at around 4 o'clock, a remark overheard by Stockwell. Next came the evidence of David Beavers, the butcher's boy, who arrived at the inn a little after 4. He found the place silent. No reply to his calling, no one in the kitchen, bar, or tap room. After checking with neighbours, he returned inside with a small group of villagers. Whilst he and a farmhand searched the lower rooms, the women went upstairs, and their scream brought everyone running. Catherine lay on the upper landing in a pool of blood. Beavers confirmed that every door in the inn was open when he arrived, and that he did not see Stockwell that day. Another witness, John William Iredale, a local spinner and a member of the Linthwaite band, testified that he had been practising in the inn earlier in the day. He left about 3:30 p.m. with Catherine alive and drawing beer in the bar. He saw only 2 men coming in during that time, strangers, not regulars, and later, when he heard of the murder, he mistakenly believed one might have been involved, following him as far as Slaithwaite. By the time of the inquest, he admitted he had been excited, confused, and almost certainly wrong. The medical evidence was given by Dr. Haig, who arrived at the inn at 4:45 p.m. He found Catherine on her back, her head resting in a pool of blood. There were no bruises, but a small, clean, oblique wound on the right side of her neck. At post-mortem, he found the blade had penetrated between the hyoid gland and the bone cartilage, severing the thyroid vessels on both sides and striking a vertebrae. The wound was 2 inches deep, at least. It could not have been self-inflicted. The instrument was a small, sharp, likely double-edged, lancet-shaped implement. Death was caused by rapid loss of blood. Dr. Haig also stated that there were signs of an attempted outrage, but not a completed assault. With this evidence, the inquest established its core facts. Catherine was alive and well at 1:50 p.m. Stockwell was with her in the kitchen shortly before Mrs. Brooke left. He knew she would be alone until about 4 o'clock. The body was discovered just after 4. Stockwell disappeared immediately afterward and has not been seen since. The inquest then adjourned while police continued their search for the missing man. At the centre of the investigation, James Stockwell. For nearly 2 weeks after the inquest, named James Stockwell as the likely perpetrator, the valley lived in a state of tense expectation. Police scoured the moors, searched barns and quarries, questioned travellers, and followed rumour after rumour, yet Stockwell seemed to have vanished into the landscape. And then, as suddenly as he had disappeared, he returned. Under cover of night, he crept back to his mother's house, only for her, in an act that stunned the district, to hand her son directly to the police. From the Huddersfield Chronicle, the 17th of September 1891. Dramatic, not to say sensational episodes have abounded in connection with the Linthwaite murder, and perhaps the most dramatic of all was the arrest at the beginning of the present week of the man who now stands charged with the crime. If his voluntary statements are to be taken as correct, he has been in the near neighbourhood of his home while the hue and cry was at its height, and his knowledge of the locality enabled him to elude the vigilance of his pursuers, even when they felt persuaded that they were close upon his heels. The police inquiries extended over a wide field, and arrests in various places showed the general belief that the man was to be looked for at a distance from his neighbourhood. Stockwell's creeping to his mother's house in the early hours of the morning and his unresisting capture by a member of the borough force gave an exciting finish to the 17-day tension through which the public of this district passed while he was at large. His confession of guilt to the charge, read out to him at the borough court, settled the public mind, although of course all the legal formalities will yet have to be gone through. It will still remain open to him to withdraw that plea and substitute one of not guilty. After his arrest, James Stockwell was in no condition to face a court. 17 days of living rough had left him emaciated, weak, and barely able to stand, and he spent several weeks recovering under medical supervision. Only once he had regained enough strength to understand the proceedings did the case move forward. And so, 3 months after the murder, with winter closing in and Christmas only days away, Stockwell was brought for trial at the West Riding Assizes. The charge was as stark as it was inevitable: the wilful murder of Catherine Dennis. From the Huddersfield Chronicle, the 19th of December 1891, the Linthwaite tragedy, trial and sentence of Stockwell, fresh evidence. At the West Riding Assizes held at Leeds on Tuesday before Justice Wright, James Stockwell, 32, Tuesday, farm labourer of Linthwaite, was indicted for the wilful murder of Catherine Dennis, domestic servant at the Ivy Hotel in Linthwaite, on the 21st of August last. There was a large crowd in court, and the greatest interest was apparently taken in the case by everybody except the prisoner, who remained seated throughout the case with his hands clasped in front of him, and never raised his eyes from the gentleman immediately in front of him. Since his arrest, Stockwell has grown his beard and seems all the better in appearance from his detention in jail. In reply to the usual question, "Are you guilty or not guilty?" the prisoner replied softly but with distinctness, "Not guilty." The opening statement. Mr. Thomas, in opening the case for the Crown, dwelt on the serious character of the charge against the prisoner, who, he said, lived at Linthwaite and was in the habit of visiting the Ivy Hotel to have a drink. He knew the girl Dennis, who would be described by her mistress as an honest, hard-working servant, but up to the day of the murder there was no suggestion of any quarrel or impropriety of any kind. He went through the facts to be detailed in evidence, directed the attention of the jury to the statements of the witnesses, and to the effect that Stockwell was seen in the house several times during the day of the murder, and that he was the last man seen to leave the house before the discovery of the girl's body, and that he absented himself from home for 16 or 17 days. Was this, he asked, the act of an innocent man who had a wife and one child living in the neighbourhood? He was ultimately arrested at the house of his parents at 2 Lower Brow Paddock, and he then said, "I haven't had anything to eat for 6 days. I must have been asleep all the time." "Where was he all that time?" counsel asked. It showed that he had been hiding. There was found on him some bean pods partly eaten, and on his clothing was also found hayseeds. When in custody, the prisoner volunteered a statement. Mr. Thomas then said that there was another statement which the prisoner made to a man named Thompson, who was, like the prisoner, in custody at Wakefield awaiting his trial at the present assizes. In concluding, Mr. Thomas said that no doubt the prisoner was to some extent under the influence of drink, but drunkenness would be no excuse for the crime. He asked the jury if they thought the evidence conclusive, considering the prisoner's visits to the public house and his subsequent attempts to escape from justice, to find him guilty. On the other hand, if the facts were not conclusive, let them acquit the prisoner. Landlady Margaret Brooke gave evidence confirming Stockwell's presence at the Ivy Inn throughout the day of the murder. He ate twice in the kitchen using his own penknife and was still there when she told Catherine she would be leaving for Huddersfield. Brooke stated that Stockwell had clearly been drinking at dinner time and was the last person she knew to have been in the girl's company before she left the inn at 1:45 p.m. Her account placed him squarely at the scene and reinforced the narrow window in which the murder occurred. Young John Charles Brooke, grandson to the landlady Mrs. Brooke, confirmed that Stockwell had been drinking steadily throughout the day. Although sober that morning, by early afternoon he was, in the witness's words, a little fresh, having consumed several glasses of beer. Brooke also saw Stockwell using his penknife at the inn, the same type of small, sharp blade the prisoner later believed to have caused Catherine's fatal wound. Importantly, Brooke confirmed that he and his companions left Stockwell alone in the house with Catherine shortly before the murder. John Walker's deposition confirmed the narrow window in which the murder took place. He saw Stockwell inside the Ivy with Catherine at about 2:30 p.m. and on his return home from Milnsbridge shortly after 4 o'clock, he saw Stockwell walking through the front door. The timing placed Stockwell at the inn at both the beginning and the end of the crucial half hour in which Catherine was killed. Multiple witnesses placed Stockwell leaving the Ivy at the crucial hour. Mrs. Jane Carter saw him walking out of the inn at about 5 minutes to 4, the same moment the butcher's boy arrived on his bicycle and head off in the direction of Huddersfield. A second witness, Peter Whiteley, met Stockwell on Yew Tree Lane shortly after 4, coming from the direction of the Ivy. Both noted he looked a bit fresh, although nothing in his manner suggested distress or haste. These sightings firmly anchored Stockwell at the inn immediately before Catherine's body was discovered. The inquest evidence largely confirmed what had already been reported. David Beavers, the butcher's boy, described arriving at the Ivy just after 4, finding the ground floor deserted and summoning the neighbours, and together with farmhand Edward Hoyle, he searched the house until Mrs. Bailey's scream sent them running upstairs, where they found Catherine lying on the landing in a pool of blood. Hoyle noted that although her clothing was slightly disturbed, it was otherwise in order. A small but important detail emerged. Anyone leaving by the back door would cross a nearby field to reach the road at the river bridge, avoiding the Manchester Road entirely, a possible escape route for the killer. A retired constable, William Stansfield, testified that he had known Stockwell well over 2 decades. Stockwell was married from a respectable local family and prone only to the occasional drinking spree. He had been seen the day before the murder, but not since. The medical evidence. Thomas Hinchcliffe Haig, surgeon of Golcar, deposed to being called to see the deceased at about 4:45 on the afternoon of Friday, the 21st of August. There was a wound in the neck which might have been caused by the knife produced. It perpetrated and penetrated the windpipe to a depth of 2 or 3 inches and separated the thyroid vessel, but not the main arteries. The loss of blood caused the death. He was of opinion that there had been a slight attempt at outrage, but he could not say how long previously. The separation of the thyroid vessel would not cause blood to spurt out very freely because there would be retraction. As this was not a direct cut and the wound was still in an oblique direction, he should think death was hardly instantaneous, but that there was no struggle, as he believed the girl was in a faint at the time. In the course of further examination, witness said he thought there might have been a recent outrage committed on the girl, but he should not like to say that there had been. He had not made a post-mortem examination in this case. Police evidence confirmed that in the 16 days between the murder and his eventual capture, Stockwell never once returned to his home despite officers keeping it under constant watch. He was finally arrested on the 7th of September, found hiding in a bedroom at his mother's house. When charged, he insisted, "I haven't done it," and claimed he had not eaten nothing for 6 days. His clothes were covered in hayseed, consistent with living rough on the moors. Later in the cells, he made a voluntary statement, speaking quietly and without emotion. He said, "It's no use going around about it. I might as well get it over with and over at once. It's all through drink. I was lying on the seat and she kept pulling my hair." As the evidence tightened around Stockwell, the sightings, the timing, the disappearance, the physical condition in which he was found, nothing prepared the court for the testimony that followed. It came not from a neighbour, nor a policeman, nor even a medical expert, but from inside Wakefield prison itself. And it was here, in the quiet routine of the prison infirmary, that the most devastating evidence against Stockwell should emerge. Henry Clark, medical officer at the Wakefield prison, said that whilst awaiting trial there, Stockwell was in the hospital. A man named who was also awaiting trial acted as nurse along with another man named Wilson. Stockwell was sent into hospital because he was weak through loss of food. Arthur Thompson, who had been convicted of stealing whiskey, was then placed in the witness box and said that he acted as a nurse to the prisoner voluntarily. Prisoners awaiting trial were not compelled to work. Laughter. From and to September the 7th to the 5th of October. On the following day, the prisoner complained about his legs being stiff, and in reply to witnesses' inquiry as to what was the matter, the prisoner said he had been sleeping in a haystack for 16 days and had nothing to eat, with the exception of a few apples and beans. Witness said he could not believe it, but the prisoner persisted in his statement. After dinner, the prisoner began to cry and told witnesses it was about his wife and child at home. On a subsequent occasion, the prisoner told the witness that it was a young girl he had murdered, and in reply to his questions said he had not been keeping company with her clandestinely. He had never had anything to do with the girl and had never seen her before to his knowledge. He further added that he must have been mad to do it, but he had been drinking heavily for 2 or 3 days, and when he was under the influence of drinks, he acted like a maniac and did not know what he was doing. The witness also asked the prisoner how it occurred, and he replied that he was drinking in the Ivy public house with another man who left him with this girl. She tormented him by knocking off his hat and by pulling his moustache and hair, and in a moment of passion he ran to get hold of her, and she ran upstairs. The prisoner said nothing immoral took place, but admitted that he put his hands underneath the girl's dress, and she said she would tell. This closed the case for the Crown. The defence. For the defence, Mr. Mellor conceded the gravity of the charge, but urged the jury to look closely at the weaknesses in the prosecution's case. Stockwell had undeniably been in and out of the Ivy that afternoon, but nothing except his latest statement actually connected him to the fatal blow. The timings relied heavily on witnesses whose recollection was uncertain, and no blood was found on Stockwell or on the pocket knife he had been using to eat his pie. If he had struck such a violent spurting wound, how had he walked calmly out of the front door without a mark on him? Mellor attacked the prison ward testimony as unreliable jailhouse evidence, likely given in hope of favour, and reminded the jury that Stockwell had made no incriminating remarks until he was weak, exhausted, and under close observations in the infirmary. He also pressed the absence of motive. The heart of the defence, however, was insanity. Mellor outlined a family history steeped in mental illness. The prisoner's grandmother and uncle had died in asylums. His mother and sister had both broken down at the same age. Stockwell now was, and his mother had again been removed to an asylum after the murder. Stockwell himself had suffered a serious head injury in youth, developed erratic behaviour when drinking, and the night before the murder had been seen drunk, agitated, delusional, and jumping wildly about. Medical witnesses testified that such hereditary instability, aggravated by alcohol, could produce what they termed impulsive insanity. The defence therefore argued that if Stockwell did commit the act, he did so in a moment of sudden, uncontrolled mental collapse, without a motive and without understanding of his actions. The Crown replied that the issue was not whether Stockwell's family history was troubled, but whether he himself had been insane at the moment of the killing. His own words to Police Constable Taylor and to Thompson matched in detail and showed awareness of what had happened. Nothing in the evidence suggested he was so intoxicated or deranged as to be unaware of his actions. The jury retired to consider their verdict at about 5 minutes to 5 o'clock. They returned into court a little more than 10 minutes, and Stockwell, who had been removed to the cells below in the interval, was brought back and stood unmoved at the bar during the terrible ordeal which followed. In answer to the usual question, the foreman of the jury stated that they had found a verdict of guilty against the prisoner. The prisoner was asked if he had anything to say why sentence of death should not be passed upon him. The answer, which he understood to be in the negative, was inaudible. Amid breathless silence, his lordship assumed the black cap and, addressing the prisoner, said the jury had performed a painful duty in arriving at their verdict. It would be for the Crown to consider whether or not there was any circumstances in the case paid in his previous history that should move the Crown to extend to him clemency. All that he, the judge, had to do was to pass upon the sentence of the law. Sentence of death was then passed in the usual form, and the prisoner walked quietly down the steps from the docks to the cellar below without betraying any emotion. Although Stockwell's counsel pursued the usual final avenue, a petition to the Home Office requesting a commutation on grounds of insanity, the effort never truly gathered force. Only a small number of local residents were willing to sign, and even fewer expressed any sympathy for the man who had killed a well-liked village girl. After reviewing the case, the Home Office declined to intervene. The law, they said, must take its course. And so, in a few days into the new year, as the winter light broke over Leeds, events reached their final and inevitable conclusion. From the Huddersfield Chronicle, the 6th of January, 1892. The Linthwaite murder, the execution of Stockwell, and the confession of the culprit. At 8 o'clock on Tuesday morning, James Stockwell, 32, farm labourer, paid the full penalty of the law at Armley Jail for the murder on August 21st of Catherine Dennis, a 16-year-old girl, a servant girl, at the Ivy Hotel in Linthwaite. On being told by the chaplain that he would have to suffer the extreme penalty of the law, he was somewhat overcome. Having hoped that the plea that insanity existed in the family would save him from the gallows, but speedily recovering himself, he said that he was prepared to die and that he was drunk when killing the girl. Stockwell was hanged on the permanent scaffold, Billington being the executioner. He walked firmly to the scaffold, and death appeared to be almost instantaneous. A drop of 8 feet was given. The condemned man had a final interview with his friends on Monday, and before his execution, and made a full confession of his guilt to the chaplain. Official report. Confession to the chaplain. Story of the crime. In the final days before his execution, Stockwell broke the silence he had kept since his arrest. To the chaplain and to a fellow prisoner acting as a ward nurse, he admitted the essential facts. He had been drinking heavily, he had been alone with Catherine, and in a moment he described as, although drink, he struck the fatal blow. He also spoke of his 19 days on the run, hiding in barns and quarries, sleeping in stacks, hearing patrols pass within yards of him. More than once, he said, he lay still while policemen discussed the manhunt only feet away. Hunger finally drove him back to civilization. The most dramatic moment of all came when he crept into his mother's bedroom before dawn, filthy, exhausted, and emaciated. She did not hesitate. Remembering her promise to the police, she wrote at once and sent for the constable. Stockwell offered no resistance. By the time the Home Secretary declined to interfere with the sentence, the prisoner had accepted that the law would take its course. He met his final hours calmly, and his confession sealed the last unanswered question in the Ivy Inn murder. In the end, what remained most striking about the Ivy Inn murder is not the manhunt, nor the drama of Stockwell's capture, but the quiet life that was taken. Catherine Dennis was a girl trusted with responsibility far beyond her years, a girl who sang while she worked and who had travelled across the country in search of opportunity. Her death shook a village, exposed the dangers faced by young women in service, and revealed how swiftly panic could fall on a community. A single small wound changed everything, and its echo lingered long after the justice was done. Further particulars. As if one fugitive wasn't enough for the Victorian newspapers that week, they served up a second man on the run. Although in his case, on the run, in doing quite a bit of heavy lifting, our next gentleman chose a far less suitable hiding place than the moors of Yorkshire. He hid on a ship for over a month, naked. Why? Nobody knows. All we do know is that after committing a murder off the Cape of Good Hope, our young sailor made an escape worthy of a Dickens villain with a head injury. He snapped his restraints, prized open a board with a fishhook, slithered into the cook's galley, and then disappeared into the timber like a disgruntled eel. From there he ate the stores, raiding the water tanks, haunted the deck like a silent, unclothed ghost, and steadfastly refused to reappear until hunger finally negotiated his surrender. It is, in short, one of the most unintentionally comic manhunts ever printed, and it appeared in the papers on the same day as Catherine Dennis's case. Another reminder that Victorian reporters had no shortage of drama to work with. From the Central Somerset Gazette, the 19th of December 1891, Murder on the High Seas. Extraordinary escape and recapture. A most extraordinary story is told concerning a murder which took place on the high seas near the Cape of Good Hope last September. It appears that 5 months ago, the bark Emmanuel of Genoa left Rangoon for London with a cargo of teak wood. The voyage proved to be an eventful one, not only by reason of the murder committed on board the vessel with its extraordinary sequel, but also by reason of the severe weather and the rough seas encountered. On September the 19th last, the bark being then off the Cape of Good Hope, a quarrel arose between two members of the crew, Carfano Niccolo and Gaff Stefan. The altercation had reference to the handling of the oak, but this trivial dispute was attended with tragic consequences, for Nicole, in a moment of passionate excitement, drew his sheath knife, a weapon with a blade 4 inches long, and stabbed Stefano, his uncle, in the left side. The blow proved a fatal one, for the heart was struck, and the victim of the crime expired in 2 or 3 minutes. There was naturally great commotion on board. The murderer was quickly seized and, without resistance, disarmed. By the captain's orders, he was handcuffed. Thus fettered, he was consigned to a small deck house adjoining the cook's galley, and the connecting links of his handcuffs were passed through a tackle, giving the prisoner plenty of play with his hands. The murder was committed at about 3 o'clock in the morning of the date mentioned. From the time of his seizure till 6 o'clock on the morning of November the 5th, he remained in captivity. But on the latter date, it was found that he had succeeded in escaping, and there were indications that in doing so he had performed a feat as extraordinary as the feats attributed to the most notorious prison breakers on record. It must have been effected deliberately and craftily, for no suspicion seemed to have been aroused that he was preparing for flight till he was found to be missing, and it was found that he had broken his fetters. How he managed to get rid of the handcuffs is not clear, but it was ascertained that he had utilized a fishhook in wrenching open a board, and so wriggled through from the place of his confinement to the cook's galley, he being a slim young fellow, only 20 years of age. The age of the murdered man was 22. The latter, as the vessel did not stop at the Cape, was buried at sea 25 hours after the crime had been committed. Great excitement was caused on board when it was discovered that Niccolo had, for the time being, escaped, but the captain surmised that if the fugitive did not drown himself to prevent being with possibly greater care was exercised, he would soon be starved into submission. Wonderful to relate, however, neither of these consistencies occurred, and a great deal of mystery attaches to the murderer's movements between November the 5th and December the 12th, when the vessel arrived at the Southwest India dock, there being no evidence to show that, for over a month, he was seen by neither captain nor crew. It was manifest that, having gained admittance immediately after his escape to the cook's galley, he had helped himself to some food. It was assumed that he had contrived to secrete himself among the huge balks of timber with which the vessel was laden up to the deck. There were cavities in which he could creep, and in which it was scarcely possible to track him, although he was known to be prowling about. He was driven to some straits for food, and hunger compelled him to emerge stealthily from his retreat, but, according to the statements of his shipmates, nothing was seen or heard of him after November the 11th, till the vessel was docked in the Thames. Between the 5th and the 9th, he twice, without observation, pillaged the provision store, and twice did break into a water tank. On the 11th, he was heard attempting once more to get into the provision store, but the noise made by those who sought to capture him caused him to abandon the attempt. How he continued to exist for the ensuing month, no satisfactory explanation is forthcoming, but it is suspected that food was placed within his reach. On the arrival of the vessel at the Southwest India dock on Saturday, the captain informed the dock police of the tragedy which had been committed, and of the fact that the murderer was still uncaptured. An inspection of the vessel failed to reveal his hiding place, and there seemed little chance of ascertaining his hiding place, and there seemed little chance of whether the fugitive had crawled in order to escape from justice. Apparently, he had buoyed himself by the hope that he could remain concealed till the vessel reached port, and he might be able to get off unperceived and so evade the penalty of his crime. The vessel was closely investigated by the dock police, reinforced by constables of the Metropolitan Police, but there did not seem much likelihood of the hunted wretch being dislodged or lured from the undiscovered aperture in the timber where he lay. Superintendent Cahill of the Dock Company's police and Superintendent Stead of the Metropolitan Police repeatedly joined in the search. Twice on Sunday a glimpse of him was obtained, but he immediately darted into his retreat. He was then without clothing. The unsuspected, however, happened, for the murderer, realizing that there was no longer hope of eventual escape, and being ravenous with hunger, decided upon revealing himself. Before surrendering, which he did at 10:30 on Monday night, he held a parley with the besiegers, stipulating that if he surrendered, he should not be ill-treated. This assurance being forthcoming, he emerged slowly in a state of absolute nudity, and before he could be removed from the vessel, he had to be provided with some clothing. The accused is now at Poplar Infirmary, where he is detained, suffering from emaciation and starvation. When he has recovered, he will be brought up at Bow Street Police Court. That concludes this episode, a tale of murder, misadventure, disappearance, and, in an unsuspected flourish, a fugitive who took to the high seas entirely unclothed. Victorian Britain never failed to provide a range. If you've enjoyed today's wander through history's stranger corners, please do give the episode a like and subscribe to the channel. Apparently, This now encourages a mysterious thing called the algorithm, a creature far beyond our understanding, but one in which you, the viewer, wield remarkable influence. If you'd like more, we have nearly 800 episodes on Patreon, all ad-free with daily releases to suit whatever mood or moment of the day you find yourself in. News of the Times, historical crime at patreon.com. This has been News of the Times, and I am Robin Coles, archivist, tea drinker, and part-time negotiator of nudist fugitives. Until next time, keep your wits about you and ideally your clothes.